Hello, BookTube, and welcome to BookTrek 2021. This is an ongoing 5-year mission conducted by myself and a group of other booktubers under the dauntless leadership of Vin at Revenant Reads, in which we explore the world of Star Trek books. And we're going one franchise at a time, 1 month at a time. So August, we're celebrating Star Trek, the original series. Then we'll move on from there. And I wanted to I'm going to make a bunch of videos in August for Star Trek, the original series. That's my Star Trek, after all. Everybody has their own. And one of the things that I've alluded to in discussing Star Trek fiction over the years, the decades, however long it's been that we've been having this conversation, is that there was a vast amount of Star Trek fiction before there was anything official, before there was anything that was actually licensed by Paramount. There was a huge amount right from the beginning. Fans were writing Star Trek fiction while the first season of the original show was airing. And that just kept going. And fans grew to know each other. They grew in contact with each other. They had unofficial conventions, circulated fanzines of fan fiction, what we would now understand as fan fiction. That happened long before there were any original Star Trek novels. And then James Blish was tapped with the job of adapting into prose the scripts of the TV show, and those did really well. He also wrote an original Star Trek novel, Spock Must Die, that did really well, and that alerted the powers that be that there was money in them that are dilithium crystals. So Star Trek novels started to appear. And a lot of those original Star Trek novels mark a different era than the Star Trek fiction that followed in its thousands after that. A lot of that original Star Trek fiction had a lot of its DNA held over from Star Trek fan fiction. A lot of the gimmicks from fan fiction carried over to those original novels, which is why people tend to, when they talk about Star Trek, the original series fiction, they tend to split it between everything that came before the novel mysteriously called Star Trek the Motion Picture, Gene Roddenberry's only Star Trek novel, and everything that came after it. It tends to be that that's the dividing line, although there is a little bleed through. There are still some very fan fiction-y novels that came out after Gene Roddenberry's novel, Star Trek the Motion Picture. That's not really a motion picture because it's a book. You can turn its pages. It's not a motion picture, obviously. It's a novel. One way or another, there is some bleed through. But not much, and it starts to go away the more corporate lawyers start to pay attention to the fiction, the more litigants start to pay attention to the fiction, the larger the series Bible grows, which is the sort of shared world, these are the understandings text that is either sent to a Star Trek writer in the early days, the Paleolithic days of stone knives and bearskins, or emailed to them. And that Bible grew and grew, and started to contain strictures of things you could not do in licensed Star Trek fiction. None of that existed in the Wild West days, and the Wild West days produced a lot of my favorite Star Trek fiction. And yet, a lot of the gimmicks that we're talking about here are very sordid, and I don't like them. I thought, since I'm always talking about this, before I get to the book that I'm doing today, I thought I would go over what those gimmicks are, at least the primary ones for me. The number one gimmick that identifies old, pre-lawyer Star Trek is an over-reliance and over-emphasis on Mr. Spock. Mr. Spock was a secondary character in the original series. Jim Kirk was supposed to be the star of the show. But what quickly developed over time, over the course of three seasons, were two things. One, Spock became a fan favorite. And two, the fans also started to love the ensemble nature. The fact that this essential command crew was great together, that you just loved them together. And that started to downplay the idea of a standout star. But fans wrote the original Star Trek fiction, and a huge amount of that is so Spock-centric that in many, many cases, including two of the most popular ongoing fan fiction series, no one else appears. Spock goes back to Vulcan or is a sex slave in the Romulan Empire, and we never see anybody else, unless maybe Jim Kirk saves him. So that's gimmick number one, that shows you're dealing with old-style, pre-lawyer science fiction, or Star Trek. And gimmick number two would be, gimmicks 2 and 3 are going to sound like 21st century virtue signaling politics, Twitter politics. But I want to stress that they're not. I want to stress that Twitter politics is warping these things. They are legitimate concerns. They were for a long time before Twitter existed. The first one of those is sexism. And that is directed at female characters, whether they are new additional characters or actual crew members of the Enterprise. And by sexism, I mean that their only defining trait is that the male characters around them find them sexually attractive, and often say that, including Captain Kirk, not just flirting with them, but talking about how attractive they are to his other officers. Totally, totally wrong, totally inappropriate, totally soiling to read. Something that belongs in the pages of Playboy or Hustler, that doesn't belong in Star Trek. It is nevertheless prevalent. A lot of these early fans let loose their inner demons by writing a lot of their fan fiction, and a lot of that element shows up a lot. Another element also that smacks of 21st century Twitter politics is racism. And here I mean literally. I don't mean an extra fold of skin on the eye or an extra shade of brown on the skin of one species. I mean literal racism, where it's different species that are involved, different alien races. In a lot of early Star Trek, and some of this holds over, but we'll get to why, but in a lot of early Star Trek, that is just totally explicit. People in the stories and novels will refer to Spock as the Vulcan. If there's a Tellarite officer on the Enterprise, they'll say, "Where's the Tellarite?" or "The Tellarite spoke up," in ways that yes, it's a little bit grating for the 21st century, but from everything that we know of the 23rd century, it would never happen, and it does often. And at its worst, our main characters will talk that way. Kirk will say, "Why isn't the Tellarite at his post?" Just totally wrong. Totally wrong. Now, some of that is understandable. Some of it holds over and is understandable because a lot of writers, when Star Trek was at its heyday, there were 4 main release novels every month. And they did well, really well. And that develops a need for authors who can turn around 90,000 words in 2 weeks. And a lot of those authors didn't know anything about Star Trek. They would get that book, that series Bible, and they were happy to get it because these were the characters they were going to be writing about. They may have heard of Mr. Spock. We don't know anything about anybody, any details like that. And oftentimes, relying on that Bible in order to get them to their word count, they would say, well, they would vary up someone's name with the Delton or the Gorn or whatever. So it wasn't actually racism on their part. It was just sloppy writing, ham-handed, mechanical writing. Those two things have resonances in the 21st century. And unfortunately, so does the next one, which is self-inserts and Mary Sue characters. For those of you who are not familiar with, for instance, current-day Marvel Comics, that's a rant for another day. Self-insert is when the writer puts themselves in the story. And a Mary Sue is the apotheosis of that, where the self-insert is better than the original cast at everything. They walk onto the stage and they're better at command than Kirk. They're more logical than Spock. They're more compassionate than McCoy. They understand alien languages faster than Uhura does. They just outdo everybody. And it's the writer's way of just having the funnest time in the world. And Star Trek is one of the first franchises, very early on. One of the earliest anthologies of fan fiction ever done under the imprimatur of an actual publisher was Star Trek: The New Voyages. And in that anthology, the 2 editors specifically said, no Mary Sues, we don't want them. They're overdone. Now, those characters, those 2 editors, wrote their share of Mary Sues, and so did virtually everybody else at the time. It's an easy plot device. It's at its best, it is designed, if it's played down, then it's just a female character or a new male character that allows you to see our old characters through new eyes. That can be done really well, but the line between it and a Mary Sue is so thin that you would like to think in the 21st century we were no longer dealing with it. You'd like to think that it was just an effective fan fiction and was gone. Unfortunately, that's not the case. A whole franchise of Star Trek Discovery, is entirely based around a Mary Sue. An overpowered, overcompensated, universally beloved, and universally respected without having earned either one, female main character who is better at everything than everybody else. That is Michael Burnham in Star Trek Discovery. It's why fans hate the show, because it's violating one of the oldest rules of Star Trek fiction and elevating a Mary Sue to the status of godhood. So that's another element. It's unfortunately still persistent, but some of the major elements of Star Trek fan fiction are no longer allowed because the lawyers put a stop to them. One of those is partial or entire nudity. Forced partial or entire nudity, where we get our main characters, not just a guest appearance or an Orion slave girl, but a main character spending significant portions of the plot naked. that is, again, hustler and playboy fiction just brought to the mainstream. And as soon as the lawyers got involved in Star Trek fiction, it went out the back window as fast as possible. You're not going to have, if you're William Shatner and you're the bankable lead star for a new Star Trek movie that is supposed to make $3 million, back when that was more than just the craft service table bill, you're not going to want to know that in a novel with your face, your image prominently portrayed on the cover, your character is naked half the time. You're not going to want, for a number of reasons, the lawyers put a stop to that. So that doesn't happen anymore. But that was a very noticeable signature feature of fan fiction. And another very noticeable signature of fan fiction, it was all over. You could, in the early days, like in the late 1960s, you could barely avoid it. It was almost requisite, was sadomasochism. Characters undergoing brutal, extended passages of torture or brutalization, beatings or domination of one kind or another. Main characters, usually Spock and Kirk. That carries over into some brand name Star Trek original fiction, including a couple of novels that I really like. Sondra Mashek and Myrna Culbreth, that original editing team, wrote a novel called The Price of the Phoenix. It's my favorite Star Trek novel. And it has a baker's dozen of these early fan fiction ticks, including a heaping helping of gratuitous nudity and sadomasochism. Jim Kirk is not just beaten up by the bad guy in that, but beaten, broken. That was a word that was often used in fan fiction. And it's obvious amateur writers working out some of the maybe buried reasons why they loved the original show so much. I don't want to inquire too deeply. One way or another, the minute Paramount lawyers saw that sort of thing, they got rid of it. It's gone. Completely gone. And the same thing is true with the last item that we're going to talk about here. The last tick of fan fiction is a homoerotic relationship between Kirk and Spock. I think one of the reasons, again, I'm not going to delve too deeply into the incel reasoning of some of the original writers of this stuff, the dot matrix crew of original writers. I knew a lot of these people. I didn't want to inquire into it then. I don't want to inquire into it now. But I think one of the reasons why people might be tempted in that direction is because the original Star Trek show gives us a three-dimensional friendship between two adult men. 3, if you count McCoy. And it's a really good portrait of what that is like. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy did not know each other their whole lives, and they became closer than family. That is rare. It's rare for any kind of plastic art, whether it's a TV show or a movie or a book, to get that well, to get that right. That's why there's such a booming fan fiction market for homoerotic relationship stories, Brokeback stories between Call and McCrae in Lonesome Dove, because for some reason, so many people that come across that kind of thing don't know what to do with it. Maybe it's a function of our society. Maybe it's the fact that in American society, at least in the 20th and 21st century, it's kind of rare for an adult man to make a new friend, much less a deep friend. That's kind of rare. It's kind of rare to happen. Society doesn't really equip men growing up with ways to understand that. Maybe that's the reason, one way or another. That went out the window. That went out the portal. And the reason why has to do with that Bible, that steadily increasing series Bible that went around to writers of Star Trek fiction. That Bible started to include lots of strictures, lots of things you couldn't do. Another fond tick of original Star Trek was for the end revealed villain to be either Dr. M'Benga from one episode of the original show, who was a black man who trained on Vulcan as an expert in Vulcan physiology. That's a fascinating story. I wish that the original Star Trek had him back a few times. He was at least as interesting as Christine Chapel. And he didn't come back ever again. But oh my, does he crop up as a villain in Star Trek fiction. And I don't quite know why. Or maybe I do and just don't want to think about it. And another recurrent villain was T'Pring, the lovely young Vulcan woman who was betrothed to Spock, mind-melded with the infant Spock when they were children. Less than a marriage, but more than a betrothal. And they're drawn to each other when Spock undergoes Pon farr. And in the course of one episode, Amok Time, written by a great science fiction author, it is revealed that T'Pring does not want to be Spock's wife. She has someone that she loves. She has someone she wants to be her husband, and it's not Spock. And she's developed a logical plan to get out of this prearrangement. She's not evil, in other words. She's a young woman who knows what she wants. She's not evil. It doesn't hurt anybody in the courses of the episode. She takes chances, but so does everybody else. And she is portrayed as heartless, cold, and logical, and she turns up as the villain in a lot of Star Trek original fan fiction and some original novels, including, again, some that I really like. But that big Star Trek book, that Bible for the series, in addition to ruling out things like a homoerotic relationship between Kirk and Spock, in addition to trying to rule out Mary Sue's, that was Star Trek's policy forever. No Mary Sue's. Until Star Trek Discovery. I don't actually know what, actually I was going to say I don't know what happened, but I do. Twitter happened. And the 21st century so-called social justice warrior who's right about everything all the time without ever trying. It became necessary to have that character be the main character, have a woman who cuts her hair like a man and has a man's name, and who is good and perfect at everything in moral and technological ways at all times. I guess because the powers that be at Paramount thought if we don't do this, we'll be dragged on Twitter by 12 psychos who spend all day on the app. I don't know one way or another. I don't know what explains Star Trek Discovery. Fortunately, we won't be dealing with it in 2021's BookTrek. I'll have to deal with it next year, but not this year. That big book included many strictures, and one of them was you cannot use a character from continuity in a way that is inconsistent with continuity. You can't have an established character who was a good guy become a villain. You can't have an established character who was sane become insane. You can't do anything like that. Strain your little imaginations to come up with other things to do than that. And that got rid. I may rail against 21st century Twitter politics, but I am nothing but happy that all of those old ticks, or at least some of them, have gone bye-bye. I wish that the Mary Sue had gone bye-bye. I wish that there weren't still a tendency to overemphasize Spock. I wish that those things were all gone. They are weak, lazy storytelling. But when I talk, as I will in the course of August, about early Star Trek and then real Star Trek, current Star Trek, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the advent of copyright lawyers, IP lawyers, lawyers who are looking at this stuff and saying, no, we're not writing snuff fiction here. Not with Paramount stamped right on the cover, not with Star Trek right there on the cover. This is a viable multi-million-dollar property. You don't get to just write whatever you want. In this one instance, I approve of lawyers because it made, I think, for better fiction. Certainly it made so that I didn't have the embarrassing feeling that I was walking through somebody's diary and while they work out their demons. And the book that I picked for today, I don't know how many books my co-hosts are going to be doing in the month of August. Keep in mind, they're all adults. They have lives. They have loved ones. They have jobs. They have personal hygiene. They're wearing pants. None of those things are true for me at all. So I can make a video a day. Don't expect a video a day from them. I have no idea what books they're going to be dealing with, because we're dealing with all kinds of grades of experience here. Vin at Revenant Reads, who is our intrepid captain, and Michael K. Vaughan have read quite a bit of Star Trek. Gina Stanyer is joining us, and she has read none. And Mark Richardson and I have read a great deal. I think in this one instance, I might be safe to say that I've read more than Mark has, because I've read virtually all of it, including going way, way back. But one way or another, you have grades of experience. But I originally planned on talking to you about a lot of Star Trek across the whole spectrum. And then I read my book for today, Spock Messiah, one of the earliest Star Trek novels, in which the crew is dispatched to a planet, and as part of their planet-going kit, they are giving the thing called a DOP, that is kind of a telepathic insert plug that allows the crew to have telepathic rapport, one way, they hope, with the inhabitants of a planet, so that suddenly you instinctively know the languages, you know the culture, you're not going to make any universal translator faux pas. It's a dumb idea. It would never have happened. The development people back at Utopia Planitia would have said, well, this isn't going to work if, for instance, it's dealing with anybody who has any kind of technical knowledge to hack these things. And imagine what would go wrong if it were used with a telepathic crew member. One way or another, it's a dumb idea, but it is the central MacGuffin of confusion in this novel, in which it seems like Mr. Spock becomes a planet-wide messiah. It seems like his DOP takes him over, and he suddenly wants to become a planet-wide messiah. The characters are all out of character. Virtually every one of those ticks I just mentioned happens in this book. There's nudity for good stretches of time. There's something that borders on sadomasochism. The one invented female crew member here is treated as nothing more than sexual chattel. Not just by the barbaric aliens of this planet, but by her own crew members, her own captain. and so on and so forth throughout here. And also the writing is awful. I don't know why it took two people to screw up this thing so bad, but nevertheless, I reread this for the beginning of BookTrek 2021, and it very nearly derailed me. And after I read this and realized this is a worthless Star Trek novel, absolutely worthless. And after I read it, I thought, well, maybe I don't want to do any pre-lawyer Star Trek then. Maybe I've had enough. Maybe I put in my dues with all of those Star Trek gimmicks that I read for so many years before there was any Star Trek, before even Spock Must Die. Maybe I put in my time, and maybe I should go to the cleaner, code-certified Star Trek and find some worth in it. And that's what I'm thinking of doing. I'm thinking that I'm not going to read any more early Star Trek for BookTrek 2021. The only thing that would change my mind is you. Right? I know this is going to sound really weird, especially to a newcomer who's coming to this channel used to YouTube, but not accustomed to this channel at all. Those of you who've been here for 5 years, can you imagine what such a newcomer must think? They must not have any idea what's going on. I have said many times before, this is the strangest parasocial relationship I know of on YouTube. If you want me to read more of those early Star Treks, those pre-lawyer Star Trek novels, I will. I don't want to just ride roughshod over what you want to see, but kindly have some mercy. I don't want to spend the whole month reading this garbage. Some of it isn't garbage. Some of it I love. Some of it's my favorite Star Trek fiction. But I was kind of thinking for BookTrek 2021, I would go away from my favorites and re-encounter stuff that maybe I haven't read in 50 years. So that's my plan for now, unless you vociferously say otherwise. That's my plan for now, is to leave Spock Messiah and all such stuff well in the rearview mirror. No Trek to Mad World, no Perry's Planet, no nothing like that. I'm just going to move on to lawyer-vetted Star Trek for next time, unless you say otherwise. But that's my first salvo here for BookTrek 2021. I will link to all my co-hosts, but I don't think I'll be able to link to any videos, because I'm pretty sure, like I said, I'm pretty sure they aren't going to make a video a day, like I am. So just so you're aware of that, I'll make sure you know who the co-hosts are. But don't expect new content all the time. And because we're leaving behind all of those old pre-lawyer Star Trek gimmicks, you also shouldn't expect nude content all the time. Okay? And none of this shipping of me and Mark Richardson. I don't want to see any of that. We're leaving all that behind as we move on to more professional Star Trek. So I will see you tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.